Hi guys, welcome back to Too Cool for Middle School. I read another 10 books, so it's time for another video. I can link down below the videos that I did for books 1 through 10 of 2020 and then 11 through 20. And today's video is books 21 through 30 of the year 2020. And it's currently mid-May, so I read these basically in a month. It was like mid-April to mid-May. I finally started writing down the dates of when I finished books. I know that Goodreads is like amazing, but there's just something that I really like about writing down the books that I read. So let's see, book 21 I finished on April 14th, and then book 30 I finished on May 21st. And people do always ask me for tips about how to get a lot of reading done when, you know, I have a job and a toddler and a lot of other stuff going on, but truly the answer is just neglect other important things that you're supposed to be doing. Instead of sleeping, instead of cleaning, instead of cooking, I read. My TV is usually taken over by my 3-year-old in the evenings, so he watches whatever he's watching and then I just sit on the couch with him and read. Plus we are currently sheltering in place, so I don't have anywhere to go or very much to do outside of this house, so I was able to read a lot of books a lot faster than usual. So let's get started with the book reviews. Book number 21 of 2020 was Mrs. Everything. My friend Latanya over on Smarty Style was reading this book, so I thought I would pick it up and kind of read along with her. It's a pretty long one, but I recommend this as like quarantine reading because it definitely draws you into the story. Like, it's one that you're just going to be looking for excuses to pick up. You will neglect important tasks in order to keep on reading this. So this one is about two sisters who are growing up in the 1950s in the suburbs. They're Jewish. I really enjoyed all of the glimpses into like their Purim celebrations and everything. So I thought that was a really interesting and important part of the story. So as these two sisters are growing up, it's really interesting just to see kind of like the generational changes. During the 60s, they're in high school. During the 70s, they're going to college. And I do feel like this book really humanizes women of that age who like grew up during those same generations. And it was a much more complex time than, you know, sometimes we tend to think that it was, just based on like the black and white photos from the 50s. It's really heartbreaking. Both of the girls go through some really, really difficult times. They both have their moments of weakness and their flaws and their bad decisions, but at the same time you like also understand the intent behind their bad decisions, and you're really rooting for them to just find a way to be happy and live their lives in a way where they can just be their true selves. So I really liked this one. I did order Big Summer, that's Jennifer Weiner's next book. I haven't started it yet, but I really like her style of writing, so I'm excited to read that one next. The next book that I finished is one that I started a long time ago. I have so many books started, you guys, that I just haven't finished yet. I get like halfway through and then I get distracted. So this was one that I did start quite a while ago. And I think this is a really, really important book. This is definitely one that I would recommend to all teachers, just to understand your place in the longer legacy of teaching as a profession. This is a really in-depth look into the origins of public schools, the origins of kind of feminizing the teacher profession, because it was not always that way, the origins of teachers unions, the profound impact that Brown versus Board of Education had on Black educators. And one chapter that really stood out to me was a chapter about Black and Brown communities trying to take control of their own curriculum, the distrust of, you know, white teachers coming into these like inner city areas where they really didn't understand the culture or the people or anything that was going on in the community. And so most of the stories in this book from the 1800s through the 1950s through today still ring really true today. You could pull almost any sentence out of this book from any chapter and we wouldn't know if you were talking about right now or 100 years ago. So I think this is a really important book for all educators to read. I would highly recommend it. Book number 23 was actually an audiobook. I don't listen to very many audiobooks. I just prefer to have a book in my hands. It helps me to concentrate a little bit more, but I had a lot of recommendations from you guys on Instagram, so I wanted to try a few of them, and I loved this one. It's called Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe, and this one is narrated by Lin-Manuel Miranda, and he does such an amazing job. Dante and Aristotle are two friends who live in New Mexico, I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly. They're in high school. Neither of them are like super popular or have tons of friends, but they end up becoming friends and going through a couple of really difficult life experiences together. And one thing that I really liked about this book was the inclusion of the parents in so much of the story. I feel like in a lot of young adult literature, like they set it up so that the parents like aren't really involved, and then like the kids have to just figure out everything themselves. But in this book, both sets of parents are really integral to the story. And Dante and Aristotle are both Mexican American, and so they kind of approach that identity in different ways, and of course their parents are a big part of that. There's a family secret that Ari is trying to uncover. Dante has his own secrets, and it's just beautiful. For me, I struggle to enjoy audiobooks, but this one was just absolutely incredible. And I also tend to not love like the plot strategy of having this secret that a teenager is trying to figure out and no one will like tell them the answers that they want. I feel like that's really common in YA literature as well, and sometimes it gets a little bit grating. But again, in this book, it just works. And so this is one that I want to get a hard copy of. I loved hearing Lin-Manuel Miranda narrate it, but I want to have this available to students in my classroom also. Book number 24 is a fairly short one that I picked up quite a while ago. It just seems like it is increasingly relevant, especially in this time when we're trying to figure out who to listen to about information concerning the pandemic and slowing the spread of COVID-19 and keeping our community safe and keeping ourselves healthy. It can be quite frustrating when people reject like all information from anyone with expertise because they think that they are involved in some kind of a conspiracy trying to trick the general public or something. So this book kind of traces like the attitudes behind that and why people are so distrustful of like the elite, people who are educated, and how that has become like this, you know, really negative thing in some circles. And of course, you know, just the ability to post anything on the internet definitely contributes to this, but that's not all of the problem. People who are interested in journalism or who teach journalism, chapter 5, I feel like would be a really interesting chapter for you to read as we go into next school year, and it would give you some things to think about and kind of frame your class around. Chapter 4 is about higher education, college, and how it's become like a consumer product. And he, as a professor, has some really interesting insight. I also feel like this chapter had a few sections that just like really turned me off and really exposed this man's intense white privilege. So there are definitely some things where I was just like, okay, no. That is not what's happening here. But it's a quick read, it's not very long, and if every time you go on social media, Facebook in particular, you just want to hit yourself in the face with a book, this is the one I would recommend. Book number 25 is called Fever 1793 by Lori Halsey Anderson. I posted this on Instagram, and it turned out that a bunch of people either like taught this book or had read it in middle school, and it's definitely one that's relevant right now. It might be a little bit like too on the nose, like a bit overkill. I don't know if I'd really want to assign this to students right now, but I just thought I would read it while I had time. It's about a yellow fever epidemic in the city of Philadelphia in 1793, and it does a pretty good job of showing how this would affect different communities of people. And it's historical fiction, of course, so it brings in a lot of really interesting historical information. And so I think for like middle school students, this would be a really good one to recommend to them or to do as a class novel. It's just rough to read right now. Like a lot of people are genuinely facing personal and family tragedies as a result of the current pandemic that we're living through. So I would be a little bit careful, but it is kind of interesting to just like look at the similarities between how people would have handled it 225 years ago or whatever, and then what's happening right now. So I was really feeling good about like audiobooks and young adult fiction, so I decided to try another young adult audiobook called Love Boat Taipei by Abigail Hing Wen. I wanted to like this book. I came into it all excited, was hoping it would be another home run like Aristotle and Dante, I could not stand it. The premise is okay. It was kind of interesting at the beginning. There's this girl named Ever, and she's an American-born Chinese girl, and she goes to Taipei. Her parents like sell a bunch of stuff to send her there to like this language program during the summer in between her senior year of high school and her freshman year of college. She loves to dance, even though she like hardly ever practices or does anything related to dance in the book until like the very, very end. But apparently that is like her passion in life. But her dad gave up his life as a doctor in China and came to the United States where they didn't recognize his degree, and now he just works as like an orderly in a hospital, and so he would like for her to have the opportunities in America that she never had. You're supposed to like feel bad forever and like, you know, want her to live her own life and follow her own dreams, but she's such a spoiled brat. She just makes like the worst decisions when she goes to Taipei, and I just could not stand her, and I wanted her parents to ground her forever, and I'm 100% on the side of her parents. So I think this just means that I am too old to read certain young adult fiction anymore, because I'm absolutely on the side of the parents. But then on the other hand, this book gets like very sexual. At first they were just doing kind of like a lot of partying, but it gets like graphically sexual. So this is definitely not one that I would recommend for middle school students. Even for high school students, it's like, but then if you're any older than that, you're just gonna think Ever is a brat. So I'm not really sure where it fits. It's getting a lot of praise on Instagram, so there are other people who like it. Maybe it was like the audiobook effect where just if I heard the word boy wonder again, I was gonna like have a seizure. But I mean, actually the thing I did like about the audiobook is that there's a lot of Mandarin in the story, and the reader of the audiobook did a really, really good job. I mean, I thought she was a good reader. I really don't think it was the audiobook aspect. I think I just didn't like the story. So moving on to one that is infinitely better, I also read Wild Swans. After reading Red Scarf Girl, which I also just like, you know, didn't love. I get it, I understand why it's an important book, but I was just like, okay, I would actually like to know much more than the information I can get out of a middle grades memoir. I found an adult memoir on kind of a similar topic. This traces 3 generations of women in China. So the author's grandmother was a young woman during like the Japanese occupation of China and then the Civil War that was happening, and she was actually a warlord's concubine, and her story in itself, like that could have been a book on its own. It's really fascinating. And then her daughter, the author's mother, was growing up during a time when communists took over. And for me, it was just really, really interesting to read about the communist takeover of China from the perspective of people who had just been living in this incredibly unstable, violent, you know, treacherous environment. And so then when the communists took over, they really did stabilize a lot of like the infrastructure in China. They eradicated a lot of diseases. They wouldn't let their soldiers just like murder people to make a point. I mean, they did a lot of good things initially from like a stability standpoint, but then we also see the effects on regular people of the Great Leap Forward and just like incredibly short-sighted economic plans and agricultural plans that were like forced upon millions and millions of people, and millions of people died of starvation. And this should be very common knowledge. I know like in high school, I think most students learn a little bit about like communist China. I don't think I did. I'm pretty sure I learned nothing about this in high school. I really didn't even learn a whole lot about this in college. So for me, this book was really, really informative. I mean, it's very long. It has to be in order for her to explain not only what was going on in her family's life, but also like why that was happening on a political level, just so that we as the reader are like able to kind of wrap our minds around things. So this is one that I think absolutely everybody should read. It's so well done. I couldn't put it down even though it was so long, and I actually ordered another book that she wrote about Mao Zedong, and I think that one's even longer. But he's a figure similar to Hitler who most people know quite a bit about, and we make sure that our students like understand, you know, the causes and effects of World War II, because we don't want things like that happening again. But that's always from such a Eurocentric place. And very similar things were happening in Asia, but we just don't tend to learn as much about that. So yeah, I'm going to read her like 650 page biography of Mao Zedong. And this one's wonderful. Book 28 was another one that I had started a really long time ago. I was trying to kind of like go through this book slowly so I could really just, you know, digest it. But I also wanted to just like read through the whole thing so that I would have a better idea of what's in here so that I could recommend it to people and then plan on using it for next year in my class. This book is Antiracist by Tiffany Jewell. I've talked about this in a few other videos, but it's beautiful inside. This is definitely the most gorgeously illustrated book that I have. And it's just so great. It's so perfect. It is broken up into like 4 different sections: understanding and growing into my identities, making sense of the world, taking action and responding to racism, and then working in solidarity against racism. These are things that most adults that I know really need to wrestle with and work through. I definitely do as well. This is a book that I can learn so much from, and even like reading through it multiple times, you'll work through like kind of different things in your own life each time, but then it's also written at a level where your students are definitely going to be able to understand this. And it's really intended for students too. So I mean, like the language and the images and the examples and everything are very much suitable for students. So for teachers, I absolutely recommend getting this book, reading all the way through it, and then going back and figuring out how you can use this in your class next year. I mean, we might have to be doing this remotely, but even though we're teaching remotely, Black people are still being killed in person for reasons that are absolutely rooted in racism every single day. So this work is still important to be done, even while most of us are sheltering in place. Book 29 is another one that I highly, highly recommend for educators. If you teach high school and you teach the history of the Vietnam War, this is great. Or even if you teach like an English class and you're looking for a really interesting way to analyze storytelling, this one is great. It's very short. And it's written almost like a play. Like there's really only dialogue and you don't even know who the different characters are. The characters are just different fonts. Some of them are over on the left side of the page, some of them are over on the right side of the page, and so you can kind of analyze what that means and like which side each of them are on, but then also the differences between the speakers or characters on the right or the left side, and if there's maybe a reason that, you know, directionally they're even on one side or the other. There's just like so much to think about and reflect on as you read through this. And again, like with not much text, it tells so much about what happened at Kent State University during a Vietnam War protest where the National Guard was brought in and they shot and killed 4 students. The community members perceived it one way, students perceived it another way. Black students perceived it maybe even a little bit differently from that. The National Guard themselves, their perspective is in this dialogue. So it's really, really interesting. It's beautifully done. And my mom was born in Kent. My grandma lived there for most of her life. We still have a lot of family there who worked at the university. So for me, I feel like this was a little bit of like family history and learning about something that they went through. And also, even if I were teaching like a college, like historiography or history methods class, I think I would assign this book as an example of a way to do history. And she explains like her methods and her research and her process and stuff in the like acknowledgments at the end. But yeah, it's hard to explain, but just go get it. The 30th book that I read this year is called Asian Americans Who Inspire Us. This is clearly a children's book, but I learned so much. It's still like 100 pages long. I mean, it has a lot of illustrations, but there's quite a bit of text in here, quite a bit of information. This isn't one that you could read to students in like a single sitting, but you could definitely take individual stories from here and discuss them with your students. I recommend this one in conjunction with the PBS documentary series called Asian Americans. So as a teacher, the best thing to do would be to watch all 5 of those episodes. You will learn so much and just acquire so much background knowledge, and then get this book, and I feel like their stories will make a lot more sense with that previously constructed backdrop of history in your mind. And then you'll be able to use this to like develop lessons and activities for your students. So I was very impressed with this one. And again, highly recommend. So overall, out of the 10, I recommend 9 of them. This was a pretty great month for reading, and let me just give you a preview of 2 of the books that I'll be talking about in my next book review video because they're so good, and if you read them now, then by the time I come out with that next video, then we can kind of like talk about them together. So this is one of my absolute favorite new books, Deacon King Kong by James McBride. I won't say anything else until the next video, but I absolutely loved it. And then Once Upon an Eid, which is a compilation of 15 stories by different authors. So both of these, absolutely amazing. Go get them and we will discuss them next time. I will link all of these books down below for your convenience. You can either order through the link or you can just take a screenshot of the book titles and then take it down to your local bookstore and do like curbside pickup or something. So thank you so much for watching and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.